cold, foggy evening when Ethan first heard the tales of the phantom lighthouse. The old lighthouse stood tall at the edge of the cliff, watching over the dark and treacherous sea. Fishermen in the nearby town spoke of it in hushed whispers. They claimed that every night, when the moon was hidden behind thick clouds, the lighthouse would flicker its light in strange patterns, sending eerie signals across the dark waters. Some said it was a ghost, others believed it was a warning, but no one ever dared to investigate. Ethan, a curious young man with an adventurous spirit, had always been fascinated by the stories. He had heard them as a child, but never took them seriously. But now, as an adult, the mystery of the lighthouse consumed him. He couldn't shake the thought of what might be lurking there, what secrets the lighthouse held. His friends warned him against going. "It's cursed," they said. "People who go there never return the same." But Ethan wasn't one to shy away from a challenge. The night of his journey, the fog was thicker than ever, and the moon was nowhere to be seen. As he made his way toward the cliff, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. The only sound was the crashing of waves below. And then, just as he reached the lighthouse, the beam of light shot out, cutting through the darkness. It was different from what he expected. Faster, more erratic. Ethan's heart raced as the light seemed to be looking for something, or someone. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the light sweep across the cliffs, illuminating the rocky shore beneath him. It seemed as though the lighthouse itself was alive, its beams scanning the surroundings like a searching eye. For a moment, the eerie silence of the night enveloped him, making him wonder whether he had made the right choice coming here. But the pull of the mystery was too strong to turn back now. He approached the lighthouse cautiously, the wind howling around him, carrying with it whispers that seemed almost human. The door to the lighthouse was weathered, its paint peeling, yet it stood as a silent guardian to the unknown. Ethan reached out, his fingers trembling slightly as he touched the cold, rusted handle. It was locked, but as he pulled, a faint click echoed from within. The door creaked open slowly, as if it had been waiting for someone to come and disturb the silence. Inside, the air was musty, and the smell of salt water and decay filled his nostrils. The beam of light from above cast long, distorted shadows across the room. Ethan stepped inside, his footsteps muffled on the wooden floor, and his eyes darted around, searching for something, anything, that might explain the stories he'd heard. The walls were lined with old, faded maps of the coastline, some of them marked with strange symbols. But it was the large, ornate mirror that caught his attention. The mirror was unlike anything he had ever seen. Its surface was cracked, but the reflection was clear as day. In the reflection, Ethan saw himself standing there, but there was something off, something unnatural. His own face seemed to be staring back at him with an expression he didn't recognize, as if it were not his own. And just as he took a step closer, the reflection moved, not in sync with his own actions. Ethan stumbled back, a cold chill running through his spine. The mirror, was it showing something beyond the present? Or was it showing a glimpse of something else? Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the mirror, unable to tear his eyes away. His reflection, his own face, twisted unnaturally, as if it had a life of its own. His heart hammered in his chest, his mind racing with questions. Was this part of the curse? Or was it the lighthouse itself, somehow warping reality? The longer he stood there, the more unsettling the image became. The reflection of his face stretched into a smile he had never made. The air grew colder, and the whispers he had heard earlier, soft and distant, now seemed to grow louder, clearer. They weren't just random sounds, they were words. "You shouldn't have come," they whispered, so softly that Ethan barely heard them. But the voice was unmistakable. He whipped his head around, expecting to see someone, but there was no one in sight. The lighthouse stood silent and still, save for the flickering light above and the growing unease that filled the air. Ethan backed away from the mirror, his eyes wide, heart racing. His mind screamed at him to leave, but something in the back of his mind, some nagging curiosity, refused to let him go. He had come for answers, and now he was closer than ever to discovering the truth behind the phantom lighthouse. But as he took another step backward, a cold gust of wind blew through the room, extinguishing the light above. The light from the top of the tower flashed again, casting long, sinister shadows that seemed to reach for Ethan, pulling him toward the center of the room. The room was swallowed by darkness, and the whispering grew louder, now unmistakably clear. "It's too late," the voice said, closer this time, as if it was right behind him. Ethan spun around, the hairs on his neck standing on end, but he saw nothing. The silence was deafening, and the darkness seemed to press in from all sides. Panic began to rise in his chest, and just as he was about to turn to run, the beam of light from the lighthouse above suddenly shot through the window, casting eerie shadows across the walls. But this time, the light didn't just flicker. It froze, focusing directly on him. The shadows seemed to move, swirling around Ethan, forming shapes that were almost human. His breath caught in his throat as the shapes shifted closer, and he could feel their cold, unseen hands reaching out toward him. He was trapped. The door behind him slammed shut with a loud bang, locking him in. The shadows closed in, and the whispers grew into a deafening chorus of voices, all speaking at once, saying the same thing. "You belong to us now." Ethan's mind raced as he struggled to understand what was happening around him. The shadows seemed to have a mind of their own, their forms shifting and slithering across the room like dark tendrils. He pressed his back against the cold wooden wall, his breath shallow and ragged. The voices, those haunting, whispering voices, seemed to echo from every direction, filling his head with a relentless, suffocating pressure. "You belong to us now," they chanted in unison, the words sinking deep into his soul. Ethan tried to move, but his limbs felt heavy, as if the darkness was holding him in place, wrapping around him like chains. The cold grew more intense, the air thick with an oppressive weight that seemed to drain the very life from his body. The beam of light from the lighthouse above pulsed in a rhythmic pattern, casting eerie shadows across the room, but it felt more like a warning than a guide. Then, from the corner of the room, something stirred. A figure emerged from the darkness, its form tall and imposing, wrapped in tattered cloaks that seemed to blend with the shadows themselves. Ethan's heart stopped in his chest as the figure moved closer, its face hidden beneath a hood. The whispers died down, and a deep, gravelly voice broke the silence. "You've come too far," the figure said, its voice echoing in the vast, empty space. "The lighthouse calls to those who seek it, but only the foolish answer. And now, you are bound to its will." Ethan's eyes widened as he realized the figure was no ghost. It was a man, or had once been. His skin was pale and weathered, as though it had been touched by the salt of the sea for centuries. But his eyes, they were what truly terrified Ethan. They were not human. They were hollow, empty voids, as if the man had long ago lost his soul to the lighthouse. Who are you?" Ethan's voice trembled, his legs unsteady beneath him. "I am the keeper," the figure replied, his voice low and haunting. "I guard this place, this cursed place, and now you are part of it. You are one of us, whether you want to be or not." The keeper reached out, and as his hand touched Ethan's arm, a coldness like nothing he had ever felt before surged through him, filling his very being with dread. The lighthouse, it seemed, had been waiting for Ethan all along. The keeper's grip tightened, and Ethan felt his body freeze, his mind spiraling into darkness. The shadowy figures around him shifted closer, their forms becoming more solid, more real. They were no longer mere shapes. They were the souls of those who had come before him, trapped in the lighthouse for eternity. "You will never leave," the keeper whispered, his cold breath brushing against Ethan's ear. "No one ever does." Ethan struggled, trying to break free from the keeper's grasp, but his body refused to obey. The coldness spreading through him was more than just physical. It was as if the very essence of the lighthouse was seeping into his soul, claiming him as its own. He gasped for breath, his chest tightening. but the darkness around him only deepened. The shadowy figures, the lost souls of past wanderers, circled him slowly, their hollow eyes staring at him with a mixture of sorrow and longing. They had once been like him, curious, brave, foolish enough to enter this forsaken place. And now they were bound to the lighthouse forever, trapped in an eternal night. The keeper's hand tightened, and Ethan felt a surge of fear that sent his mind spiraling out of control. He could hear the whispers again, louder now, the voices of the dead all speaking at once. "You can't escape," they warned, their voices echoing in his head. "The lighthouse is forever." The keeper's voice rang out again, colder this time, as if it had been waiting for him to understand. "You are part of the lighthouse now. This place does not let go. Once it calls to you, there is no escape. We are all part of its curse." Ethan's mind raced, memories of his life flashing before him. Was this how it ended? Trapped in this god-forsaken place, with no hope of ever escaping? He could feel the weight of the lighthouse's power pressing in on him, the walls closing in, the light above growing brighter and more intense. His body was numb, his spirit battered, but there was one thought that remained clear in his mind. He could not give in, not without a fight. With all the strength he had left, Ethan wrenched himself free from the keeper's grasp. His legs shook beneath him, but he stumbled toward the door, desperate to escape. The room seemed to twist and shift, the shadows closing in on him as the figures reached out to pull him back. But Ethan kept moving, his heart pounding in his chest, the cold sweat on his brow mingling with the salty air. He reached the door and slammed his shoulder against it, pushing with every ounce of his remaining strength. The door creaked open, and for a moment, he felt the cool night air rush toward him. But as he stepped through, he felt the keeper's voice, a low growl that seemed to come from all directions, echoing in his mind. "You can run, but you can never escape." The lighthouse loomed behind him, its beam of light still cutting through the fog like an unblinking eye. The wind howled, and the whispers of the past seemed to follow him. But Ethan kept running, away from the lighthouse, away from the curse that had tried to claim him. He didn't look back. He didn't dare. As he reached the edge of the cliff, he stopped and turned, his breath ragged, his body trembling. The lighthouse was now just a silhouette in the distance, its light still flickering, still watching. The whispers were gone, and for the first time since he had entered that cursed place, he felt a strange calm settle over him. The curse hadn't claimed him, not yet, but as the wind whispered through the trees, he couldn't shake the feeling that the lighthouse was still there, waiting. And as he walked away, he couldn't help but wonder if anyone could ever truly leave once the lighthouse had called to them. The days that followed Ethan's narrow escape from the phantom lighthouse were far from peaceful. No matter how hard he tried to move on, the memory of the lighthouse lingered, like an unshakable shadow. The town, too, seemed different, quieter, as if the curse had spread, sinking into the very bones of the place. Ethan couldn't ignore the feeling that something was waiting for him, just beyond the edge of his awareness. The whispers of the lighthouse, soft and haunting, would return to him at night, reminding him of its pull. It wasn't over. He wasn't free. As the sun set one evening, a beam of light sliced through the fog outside his window. Ethan froze. That light, he had seen it before. The lighthouse. He could feel its presence, even from a distance. His heart skipped a beat, and he rushed to the window, hoping it was just his imagination. But no. The beam grew stronger, brighter, cutting through the thick mist like a blade. It was real. Ethan's pulse quickened. He couldn't ignore it any longer. The lighthouse was calling him again. Before he could think, there was a knock at the door. His heart leapt in his chest. He hadn't been expecting anyone. His hands trembled as he opened the door, revealing nothing but a small, weathered note lying on the ground. He picked it up, his eyes scanning the ink-stained paper. "Return to the lighthouse. It's waiting for you." His blood ran cold. He had hoped the lighthouse's grip on him was broken, but now he knew. It wasn't over. The lighthouse was calling, and Ethan had no choice but to answer. With a heavy heart, he stepped out into the night. The fog rolled in thick, as if the town itself was trying to keep him from returning. The sound of crashing waves echoed in the distance. It was a sound that had haunted him, that would haunt him forever. The lighthouse was waiting. As he walked, the fog seemed to stretch on forever, the light growing stronger with each step. It felt like he was walking toward his doom, but he couldn't stop. The pull was too strong. The lighthouse called to him, and he had to answer. When Ethan finally reached the lighthouse, the door stood open, just as it had before. He didn't hesitate this time. He knew what he had to do. His feet moved on their own, carrying him inside. The air inside the lighthouse was colder than he remembered, the darkness even more suffocating. The whispers of lost souls filled his ears, their voices pleading, echoing off the walls. The beam above flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. The lighthouse wasn't just a building, it was alive. And it was hungry. Ethan walked deeper into the lighthouse, each step feeling heavier, as though the walls were closing in around him. The closer he got to the center, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The beam of light grew blindingly bright, and the cold seeped into his very bones. The keeper appeared once more, his hollow eyes staring at Ethan with a mixture of pity and triumph. "You can never escape," the keeper whispered, his voice like ice. "Once the lighthouse calls, you belong to it forever. And now, you are one of us." Ethan's chest tightened, but he knew it was true. The lighthouse had claimed him. He was part of it now, bound to its curse. There was no escape. No one had ever truly left the phantom lighthouse. Not once had set its sights on you. As the light grew brighter, Ethan felt himself fading. The cold, the darkness, the whispers, they all became a part of him. He had become a part of the lighthouse, a lost soul trapped within its walls. The beam of light flickered one last time before consuming him completely. The lighthouse had claimed another soul, and it would continue to call to the next unsuspecting victim. But here's the question for you, dear viewer. Do you think Ethan could have escaped the lighthouse, or was it truly inevitable? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more mysterious tales.